Welcome to the Brain Picker Pro Show, live from Lake Wiley, South Carolina. Larry Goins, I'm really excited you guys are watching, listening right now. I got a special guest. I've been wanting to get him on for a long, long time. I got to tell you, I finally found somebody that's been investing longer than I have. Right? So please give a warm welcome, David Tilney. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
That's awesome. Now, a lot of you guys may not know this. I mean, he is a master lease expert. He loves real estate. He travels. He lives on different parts of the country, different times of the year. He has 0 employees. He's got mailbox money coming. It's not even mailbox money. It's ACH money coming in. So I'm just really excited. David, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I bought my first house in 1978. Someone actually pushed me, pulled me, dragged me, and got me to buy it with them. And this wonderful little gem of a house, I think, cost us $28,500. And
Right.
we took it subject to 8% VA loan, and we used our credit cards to come up with the amount of the down payment. And from that little house, everything kind of changed. That first house was a little unusual. It was, you buy what you can afford to buy, which wasn't much back then.
Right.
And so that particular house was a little 3-bedroom house with a 1-car garage on the outside.
Uh-huh.
On the inside, they raised the floor of the garage, put sheetrock right over the glass in the garage door, put in a popcorn ceiling with speckles in it and a conical fireplace, and it didn't have a window in the room. And it was my partner, who I bought this with, said, well, this is romantic. It had a conical fireplace, and that was it. And the house was, it couldn't even afford any carpet in the house. It was vinyl throughout the entire house.
Wow.
So from that, we went on, and I've been buying houses ever since. I'm a bit at a different stage of my life at this point. I'm an ender. I'm not a starter. I'm no longer an estate builder. But I very much think that what we do as landlords is very valuable. I mean, we choose to have a profession that, unlike producing income for your family by having a liquor store, you provide one of the most basic needs for human beings anywhere, housing. And I feel very good about that. I feel very good about my tenants. I've had wonderful relationships over the years, and it's been an incredible blessing to have fallen into this business that I've been in for more than 40 years now.
That is awesome. That is awesome. You bought your first house in 1978. That's awesome. I did my first deal in 1986. So we're not too far apart.
So you're a newbie.
Yeah, I know. I love it. I love it. You mentioned you took over a VA loan subject to. My very first deal was an FHA non-qualifying assumable loan. You remember those?
Oh, these were non-qualifying, assumable at the time. I mean, there was no paragraph 13 or whatever the heck it is.
Right.
When we started out in the business, we would buy subject to what we thought were low-interest loans, and they were low-interest loans. They were 8%, and we'd wrap the financing and sell it and take the spread. And then interest rates went up, and we had to stop that business. And the next thing we did was we got into the foreclosure business, and at one point in time, I was the largest buyer of foreclosures in my county. But then that changed because people came in and started paying 120 cents of value on the dollar, and I got pushed out of that business. Next thing we did was we did tax sales, and we started that in 1984. And that worked well for a period of time until people started coming in from Chicago with suitcases full of money, just because the yields were pretty good.
Right.
And from then we transitioned into master leasing, where we leased people's properties and turned around and subleased it and took a spread. Mm-hmm. And that has still been good to this day. And that is actually what we've told our kids to do. And it's what we've told a lot of folks who are starting out in the business that don't have much capital as a way to really get started and get your first bite out of the property and give yourself the opportunity to get to know the owners and get them to trust you. And at some point in time down the road, when that property is available for sale, if it makes a good rental, you may have the opportunity to buy it. So it's been a way to kind of generate income quickly, but also to test drive the property and drive it around the block and see if you even are interested in it.
I love that. That's a great strategy. The master lease. I love that. I love that. So you mentioned to me before we even got on here, you hadn't evicted a person in what years, since what, 1981 or something?
Yeah, the only eviction I ever did was a urologist out of a high-end house in Colorado Springs. And it wasn't for non-payment of rent, but he had too much money, didn't care about his stuff, and so consequently he didn't care about our stuff, and he was wasting the asset. And it's the only time I have done an eviction, and I went to court I had a neighbor testify. I had a letter from the homeowners association. This particular property was not one I owned. It was one I was running for someone else. So I had the owner there. I had our attorney there, and we'll swat flies with a sledgehammer. Now, to show you how he really didn't care about the house, he was a single parent running a couple of teenage kids. He was practicing urology and building fourplexes because that was the time that real estate was really hot and everyone wanted to get into it.
Right.
The night we threw him out in the street, his kids were on the roof ripping off shake shingles and burning them in the driveway in a bonfire. So, just because you got money doesn't mean you're going to be a good tenant.
That's exactly right.
You really, we want folks who are going to take our house and make it their home. And that wasn't the case in this particular situation. But I think if and when you have evictions, you really need to do an autopsy and look at it and say, whose fault was it?
Right.
It wasn't his fault. It was my fault. I put the wrong guy in there. I hired the wrong guy to do a job. And that was that tenant. And from our standpoint, we do know the job description that we're asking of folks that move into our properties. And I'll just share it. The number one thing is maintain and improve the house and grounds. That's the number one thing we want to take place. Secondly, obviously, we want them to pay the rent on time. If they don't want to do that, they shouldn't rent from us because we're too tough.
Right.
Thirdly, we want them to get along with the neighbors. Fourthly, and I look them in the eye and I say, I want you to stay at least until you die, and hopefully until your kids die. And we kind of chuckle a little bit. And, they may not want to stay quite that long, but we really are in the long-term business. And lastly, we let them know that we want them essentially to be the on-site resident manager and maintain the house. And yet, if they have a problem where they need a support team, boy, we're Johnny on the spot. I put a Bluetooth in the morning. I take it out at night. I don't screen my calls. I attempt to answer on the first ring. But and most of your people listening probably won't understand this, but I feel like the Maytag repairman. In the old days, they used to have an ad that said, the Maytag repairman never gets a call. Right. And I rarely get calls from my tenants. My tenants do wonderful things for us.
So Dave, that's the magic $64,000 question right there. How do you do that? How do you have, I know you're the guy for hassle-free property management. How do you do it?
Well, I think the first thing you got to say is you've got to share expectations. Too often, especially today, people are using the internet and whatever to do everything they possibly can automatically. And I'll give you some examples. They want the house to be shown by the applicants. They don't want to be involved there. They want applications filled out online. They want leases filled out online. And if they don't have to ever meet them and can somehow get them the keys, that's great too.
Right.
Well, I'm really into systems. Systems, I couldn't run my business without systems. You mentioned that we collect our rents using ACH, which is automatic clearinghouse, meaning we take the money right out of our tenants' bank accounts. But that doesn't mean we don't want to create relationships with our occupants. We find that meetings are very important, and although we do not show our properties, we do not inspect our properties, we have systems for those things. We do go through a lease up with all applicants. I believe that every time a meeting takes place with a tenant, a training session is taking place, and the question is who's training who. And so you want to be the trainer and not the trainee. And so that time's very, very valuable. and I will spend an hour and a half or 2 hours doing a lease up, and folks will say, well, how can you afford to do that? Well, if I do that correctly and I share expectations and realize that time is essentially the last screening in our sieve process, that if everything looked right, smelled right, and tasted right prior to that, but these folks aren't the folks we want to do business with, it should weed them out. If all that works out correctly, then I've essentially bought myself an annuity from then on. And our longest tenant was with us for 24 years and 10 months. And the only reason they moved is the wife went into the hospital. Another tenant was with us for 18 years and finally retired and bought a house, and we're still good friends with that person.
Wow.
We have a lot of people who have been with us over 10 years. Longevity is key in this business. I mean, longevity of tenants occupying your properties.
Sure.
Turnovers can cost you a lot. We're very good at turnovers in that we tend to go from a tenant to a tenant with zero downtime in well over 90% of the case. But still, it's a process, and you'd like to not have to go through that if you don't have to. Now, let me just talk about turnover for a second, because I find one of the things landlords oftentimes miss is what turnover really costs them. And the reason I say that is, most tenants leave typically on the last day of the month, typically. And most new occupants want to move in typically on the first day of the month. So let's say you're a crackerjack landlord and you're really good at dealing with what in the industry you call make-ready time, meaning you go in and spiff and shine, do the carpets and square things away, and you can get the whole thing done in 2 days.
Right.
Well, how much time have you really lost? In many cases, you've lost 1 month. And landlords don't really get that too often. They can't afford to do that for any number of reasons. First of all, that's like 8% of your rents if you turn over your properties every 12 months.
Yeah.
You can't afford that. But more than that, houses are meant to be lived in. You need a good steward in your house protecting it and taking care of it. Pipes will freeze in Colorado in the winter if there's no heat. We're high desert, so if you don't water the lawns, you lose the lawn very, very quickly. In some parts of the country, people lose air conditioner compressors if a house is vacant for any length of time. If the price of copper is a certain price, people go into the houses and rip the wiring out of the wall. You need to keep your tenants in the house, and that's the most important job you've got as a landlord. So you need to create rapport, and if you do everything automatic with no touchy-feely, with no indication that you care for the people in your properties, you're going to have a problem long term, and you're essentially going to go through burnout, and you're just going to be inventorying your properties for those of us who do know how to manage and will take care of them.
So what you're saying is it's all about the relationship and setting the expectation up front.
I think that's a lot. And screening for the right person. Screening is 90%. I mean, you got to get the right guy in the first place. And one of the issues with that is, rents have gone through the roof, but incomes have not gone through the roof in many places. So it's very difficult to find the needle in the haystack. And we may have to deal with 50 applicants in some cases to find the right person. Well, if we're going out and showing the property those times, you can't afford to do that. You'll absolutely go broke and you'll go berserk. But we have systems, again, that our existing tenants show applicants the properties before they leave. And they're on the team, and we motivate them to do that. And then when the new tenant moves in, he inspects the property, and we have a very, very complete inspection report that I think is about 12 pages. And his inspection report is compared to the inspection report that we were given by the tenant who just moved out. And in comparing those inspection reports, we can determine how the prior tenant dealt with the property. And our prior tenants do an excellent job cleaning them up. They do a wonderful job for us. And, we really do believe that our properties are not our assets. Our assets are our tenants. Many folks have read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book.
Right.
And if you look at Rich Dad Poor Dad, he talks about, assets and liabilities. And his definition of an asset is an asset pays you, whereas a liability eats you. And I'm here to tell you that a vacant house eats you alive. It's the tenant that pays you. And so if you realize that as a landlord, and too often landlords say, well, tenants are liars. They never look better than the day they move in, and it goes downhill from there. That's not my experience. When I'm with a group of landlords, one of the questions I'll ask is, how many of you were tenants? And in most cases, every one of us was a tenant at some point in their life. And then I'll say, well, how many of you were good tenants? And a lot of folks perceive they were good tenants. Every once in a while, I get several hands that go up that they were a lousy tenant. And I say, well, don't rent to people like you. You want to find the good folks. And so tenant screening, I would say, is number one. Sharing expectations is number two. Having good systems and procedures, very important. But real estate has always been a people business. And no matter how things change in the future, it is a people business, and you've got to realize that and pay attention to that.
That's so important. You said a lot of really good things during that little segment. So many people jump in and they take the first tenant that has the deposit and the first month's rent, don't they?
Well, I think, yeah, when they're just starting, but then they learn. I mean, I made plenty of errors, but you learn. And, I went to court that one time and I decided that was not fun. It gave me a headache. It took me a tremendous amount of time. Right. I had my documentation by the pound. And yes, we won. But did I get any money? No, I didn't get any money. And it was a waste of time. And I determined I never wanted to go back to court again. And knock on wood, we never have. I think, landlords, most people understand the golden rule. Treat people the way you'd like to be treated.
Right.
I think in dealing with your tenants, if you've got good folks in there, you've really got to up it to the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is treat folks the way they want to be treated.
Good point.
So as a landlord, as a manager, what you want to do is you want to find out the hot buttons for your individual tenants.
Right.
And you want to push that button so you get the most out of them and they do the best job they possibly can for you. If landlords would change their procedure so that they look at their tenants as employees instead of as tenants, and they're hiring an employee to do a job.
Right.
And so if you're hiring an employee to do a job, do you take someone who crosses a minimum threshold, or are you like the Marines that look for the best of the best, a few good men? Now, you have to comply with fair housing, and you got to be consistent in all your screening procedures, and you've got to have procedures that will back up that you really had blind tests in dealing with all these folks. And we really have that. We don't know who's looking at our properties. We don't know who's calling on our properties. We're not involved until we get applications in front of us. And we can shake down the applications and theoretically put 10 of them side by side, and the best of the best will rise to the top.
Right.
And so, systems again, coupled with the people skills of, that's what this business is all about. That's really what most businesses are about.
Dave, we're old school. A lot of people don't realize this is a people business, right? And you're dealing with human beings. You're dealing with people who, moving is a big thing. Maybe they're changing school systems or whatever. And there's a lot of things going on in people's lives. But it is a people business. There's no question about it. You can use a lot of systems and processes and procedures, but nothing beats that face-to-face, one-on-one, having a conversation. And you can also pick up a lot when you're talking to those people as well. And you can tell if this is a person that you want in your asset, right? In your property, right? So I think that's very, very important. You made a comment a minute ago that I just want to mention. You said every house needs a good steward, right? A good steward to be in that. I've never heard anybody say that, but I love that term, and I'm going to remember that. That was really good. Every house needs a good steward in it, right?
Well, yeah. You don't want people who are quote unquote camping out in your house. You really want people who want to take your house and make it their home. They need to internalize. In the old days, I would try and sell people as to why they wanted to rent our properties. I don't do that anymore. I want to turn the tables around and force them to sell me as to why I should give them the keys to my castle. If they are making do, if they don't want to be there necessarily, or they're short term, I don't want to shoehorn them in. It's just not going to work. You need folks who are going to have pride in the properties they live in. That doesn't mean you need, and price points are all different across the country, but you don't need 4,000 square foot houses with, granite countertops and everything impeccable. No, you need neat and tidy properties where there are no functional defects, where everything's maintained, and from my standpoint, places that I wouldn't be afraid personally to be in. Your tenants don't want to be fearful to live in a neighborhood.
No.
And they want things that work, and they want landlords who are concerned and will keep those things up. But whether it's 800 square feet or 4,000 square feet, anything in between works. I'm here to tell you that dealing with white collar houses, the high end houses, are much tougher than the blue collar houses for any number of reasons. First of all, the white collar tenants have no usable skills, generally speaking.
Right.
They have some specialty that they do, but oftentimes they need help crossing the street. And I can give you a very clear example of that. We had a tenant in a white collar house that went on vacation in December. And so he did what he always did when he went on vacation from his house, which was in San Diego, California, meaning he turned the furnace off on the 22nd of December.
No.
And we caught the problem before the pipes thawed, and we turned off all the water and then got a plumber in. But we had, I think, 32 breaks on 3 floors, and the only way the breaks could be found was you had to turn the water on, hear where the water was running in the walls, bust through the sheetrock, find the break, and fix it.
Wow.
Another problem with the white-collar folks is, in many cases, they don't own a toolbox. They can't fix anything. Their houses have more moving parts. They're more expensive to rehab, meaning carpet, floor coverings, that kind of thing. Right. When they lose their job, they send out resumes. The blue-collar guy, he can fix things. When he can't fix things, he has a buddy who can fix things.
Right.
When he loses his job, he gets a job with a competitor company right away, a sheetrocker, a painter, a plumber. They have a skill set. So, I personally, my sweet spot for this business is kind of high-end blue-collar, low-end white-collar. So the white-collar guy can come down without losing his self-esteem, and the blue-collar guy with a champagne appetite with a beer pocketbook, he can kind of just get into it and be happy and stay there a long time.
That's really good. That's really good. Tell us a little bit about your formula for, renting properties, how to make the numbers work because we've got a lot of people watching this. Some of them are brand new, maybe never done their first deal. Some of them, maybe they've flipped some houses. Maybe they want to start creating passive income now, because we all know a lot of people getting into real estate, they need cash now at first. And then there comes a time when they want to start building a portfolio and have passive income. So what's the formula that you use for buying and hold to make sure that the numbers work?
Yeah, I'm not much of a formula guy. I'm a kind of the whittle and rock, talk to folks, see what their situation is, develop their problem, see what they need, see if I can give it to them and see what's left, and I'll take everything that's left. That's kind of my approach. And I think that, a formula where you have one map to the gold mine, that just doesn't work. The one thing I can tell you about the real estate business is it's constant change.
Right.
I kind of gave you some of my history, and you got to be able to change. I think for folks starting out today, the one recommendation I would give them is, you don't have to own the property. You have to control the property. Rockefeller said, own nothing, control everything. And you got to think, if you're starting out, what you really want is the income. And, I'll ask people, I'll say, well, okay, how many people in this room, I'm talking to a group, own real estate? And a whole bunch of hands will go up, and I'll say, well, do you really own it, or are you buying it on time? and then a bunch of hands will go down because they have debt on it. They don't own it. They're
Right.
buying it.
Right.
So then I'll say, okay, how many of you with free and clear? You own it, right? You don't have to pay anything for it anymore, right? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, explain to me how then I was able to get title to a property just by paying its taxes. I don't think you ever own anything. If you don't make payments to some state entity or something, they take the property away from you.
Right.
I got a single family house just by paying someone's property taxes. So I think we're hung up that we got to be entitled. And when you really think about it, being entitled brings liability with it. It puts
Right.
a bullseye on your back.
Uh-huh.
You got to look at what are the benefits you want from the real estate. And for your folks, that are starting, the biggest benefit they want is income. And income, they can generate income by leasing the property and turning around and subleasing the property. In 1984, I leased a house for 35 years at a fixed rent. And I secured my lease with a deed of trust that said if the owners failed to pay the underlying indebtedness or taxes or insurance, I could foreclose them. 10 years later, I was given half the appreciation on the property to remove my lease from the property.
Wow.
Leasehold interests are very, very valuable. People don't see it. People, when you negotiate, they're relative. I mean, no one does it. It's such a simple way to get your first bite out of the property. People talk about lease options, but rarely do you hear them talk about leases. And the difference being that if you negotiate a lease option, you generally got something that's more than a lease. And the owner who's giving you that lease option either wants to charge you something for the option consideration, meaning the right to buy the property under some conditions at a later date,
Right.
or they want to charge you inflated rent. I don't want to pay inflated rent. I'd much rather lease the property, not have an option on it. And
Right.
I actually believe if you have a good, long enough term lease, well secured, you have a stealth option because they can't refinance it. They can't sell it. They can't do anything other than subject to your lease. Yeah, they can sell it, but most people who want to buy a single family house want rights of possession. And if you have a lease on it, they're not going to get rights of possession unless they buy your lease off. So leases, I think, can be extremely valuable. They can be performance-based, which says essentially that I'll pay you a percentage of the rent I receive if and when I receive it. If I don't receive it, I won't pay it. Or they can be fixed-based, meaning I'll pay you a certain rent. I'll guarantee the rent whether it's vacant or full. I'll take care of all the expenses up to a stop loss. Or they can be some hybrid in between. And the nice thing is it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a formula deal. It's what are your needs, Mr. and Ms. Owner? Can I meet your needs and what's left? So when I go in to negotiate or to find an opportunity which may allow for some good to come about for me and for the owners, because you have to meet their needs first, or
Right.
you're never gonna accomplish anything.
Right.
And so my approach would be, can I buy it? Can I loan against it? Can I option it? Can I lease it? What are your needs? And so you got to solve their problem first.
Right.
And a good friend of mine, Bill Cook, takes the approach that in this business, you're all about helping people. And if you go in with the idea that you really want to help people solve problems, and you expect nothing in return, good things will happen to you over time. And I found that really to be true.
And you mentioned early on about the master leasing, and you were recommending your kids do that, and people starting out doing it. It is a great way for maybe a newbie or somebody that's just getting started to be able to get into the real estate game and create some cash flow without having to qualify for a loan or have cash to buy a property or raise private money or whatever. They can start from where they are right now doing master leases, can't they?
Yeah, they can. And let me just point out some of the benefits that people don't think of. For example, if you buy the property, you can write it off over time, correct?
Right.
Over what time?
Yeah, a limited amount of time. And then
Well,
you
I
fully
mean, it's
depreciate
normally
it.
27 and a half years or
Right.
40 years, right?
Right.
Can you write the whole thing off?
Yeah, eventually, yes.
Can't write the ground off.
Oh, yeah, 80/20.
Can't
Yeah.
write the ground. If you lease the property, every dime you pay in lease payments is an expense. Every
That's a great
dime
point.
you pay.
That's a
Now
great
think
point.
about this. If you have a performance lease where you agree to pay, let's say, just for the sake of numbers, pay 90% of whatever you collect if and when you collect it. That sounds a little bit like a management agreement where you would charge 10% of rent to manage a property, right?
Right.
Difference being that you're not under a fiduciary relationship with the owner. You're not working for them. You're working for yourself. But look at it from a tax angle. If you are in the management business, that's earned income. If you have $100,000 of management income, it equates to about $31,000 and change of federal taxes paid. If you have that exact same amount, that $100,000 of master leasing income, your taxes are, I can't remember, it's $18,000 or $19,000 and change. Significantly less. Why? It's passive income,
Right.
not active income. Passive income is not subject to self-employment tax. You've just saved 15% taxes by doing nothing other than changing your documentation. There's just so many benefits. You know, management companies, when they're talking, people say, well, how can I master lease properties? Well, the first question you ask is, do anyone have their properties managed by a management company? And the answer is yes. There's tons of management companies. They're turning up all over the country, more
Right.
and more and more. Why? Because real estate guys want a regular income that comes in monthly,
Right.
and management will do that. So anything that a management company could negotiate, you have more tools at your discretion, because your situation, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You can do a performance lease. You can do a fixed lease. You can actually take money out of your wallet and pay folks for a lease. Management company, they have one-size-fits-all. Here's what we charge. Here are the extra things we charge for. Very, very different. My son-in-law supports my daughter. One of my sons-in-law supports my daughter and 3 kids and a dog, master leasing a bunch of properties. But
Wow.
during the process of running those, he's also been able to end up in ownership on a bunch. If you underpromise and overperform, meaning do a great job in the process of master leasing properties, you know, all properties are at some point in time, they're sold. And if you have an owner who's no longer in your community and you've master leased their property long term, who are they going to want to sell the property to? Who might they finance the property to? I've had some wonderful opportunities come my way. It's a great way to pick up properties. It's a great way to generate income. You can generate capital gains, as I showed when I was paid to take my lease off a property after 10 years. There's just a myriad. Most of the bundles of ownership rights that you can acquire through ownership, you can also acquire through good leases.
That's awesome. That's really good. Now, you mentioned taxes a minute ago, and taxes, that's a huge part. That's probably the biggest expense any real estate investor will have ever, right? Can you do these master leases in a self-directed type of retirement account?
Some people do. I would not recommend it.
Okay.
Why? If someone stubs their toe in any fashion,
Right.
meaning a tenant, could that jeopardize the situation? You certainly could not manage it yourself.
Right.
You could have it in a self-directed with someone else running it. Because if you're running it, that's a problem. You can certainly put mortgages in a self-directed. You can certainly put options in a self-directed. I personally would not put ownership of properties in a self-directed. Now, if you do put ownership, because as I said, some people do, one thing that's absolutely crucial is you may not have recourse debt on it. If you have recourse debt on it, it messes up the whole thing. So they must either be free and clear or they must be non-recourse. But I take the position that if something happens in that property, you do have the potential for a problem. And you may not manage that property yourself, because then you're dealing directly, and that's a no-no.
That's very, very important. And I thought that's what you were going to say, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you are buying any rental property or master leasing or anything in a retirement account, you, the account holder, like me, I would not want to be the one to manage the property, collect the rents, deal with the tenants, right?
Right. Can't do it.
That's good. That's good. So, man, this has just been great. This has been a lot of good info. Now, Dave, you have an event where you teach people how to do this, right?
I do. Once or twice a year, we hold a 3-day event. 2 days of it is hassle-free property management. 1 day is master leasing. Now, I won't let anyone take the master leasing without taking the management, because management, I actually believe that management is the key to the real estate business.
Right.
If you really don't know how to manage right, you really are just inventorying the property for those of us who do. So the management is the key, and one kind of works together with the other. The master leasing it's a sexy topic that everyone wants. But the management really is much more, so much more information in the management portion, which is why it's a 2-day deal. The master leasing is relatively simple once you really understand how management works. But there's some real reasons why they also have to be tied together. For example, if you're granting someone rights of possession to a property, and in any possible way that you can't imagine today, you lose your leasehold interest above them, you've just committed a fraud if you can't get them out, because you promised them rights of possession and you've lost the ability to give them rights of possession.
Right.
So the way things have to dovetail together is very, very important.
That's so important. So, Dave, if somebody wanted to find out more about you or about your events or, whatever, how would they reach out to you? You feel free to give out a website, a phone number, email, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, if they just know my name, that's as good as anything else. My website is davidtilney.com, and it's spelled David, Tiln as in Nancy, EY.com. On the website, it's got my various information. You also have my cell phone number. You can email me. I'm not hiding. I'm there. I've been doing this. I think this is the 28th year we've taught our seminars. There was a time when I wanted to trade my time for more money. At my stage of the life, I really want to trade my money for more time. So how much longer? I love teaching. I hate marketing. But we teach, as I say, once or twice a year. This being 2018, we are doing a seminar in Costa Mesa, California in September.
Yeah, September 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, looks like.
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
I'm on your site right now. And you know what, David, I got to tell you, I've been trying to get to one of your events for about 3 years now. Many people, as I'm out on the road speaking, teaching, and training, have brought up your name. And I always go to your site, see when your next event is. I'm like, oh, I can't make it. I'm traveling here, or I'm speaking at this event there. So I'm going to do my best to come see you in September.
Great. Priorities. You got to set priorities. I'm getting pretty long in tooth. A lot of gray hair.
I hear you. I know the feeling. Dave, I really, really appreciate you being on. It's been great hanging out with you and learning more about what you do. And thanks so much for what you do. And just keep doing what you do, man.
Thanks very much for allowing me on. I enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.